Good morning, and welcome to the Morning Breath Livestream, where we start our day with coherence. I'm your host, Jeremy Tunnell, systems designer and coherence coach. This is week 12, day 59 of our 14-week journey, The Path of Personal Transformation. Today, we continue our exploration of coherence practices through the subject of self-inquiry. Not simply reflection, nor self-analysis, but the willingness to continually question the assumptions, beliefs, and narratives that shape the way we see ourselves and the world around us. Because growth requires something difficult, the humility to admit we may not fully know. Certainty becomes a prison, because once you become certain, you stop exploring, you stop listening, and you no longer question. We leave behind learning, and often, the deeper our certainty becomes, the narrower our perception becomes with it. Bias strengthens, prejudice hardens, and complexity collapses into simplicity, and eventually, we become trapped inside our own conclusions. But inquiry keeps the conscious mind moving. There was a time in my life when I believed having answers meant strength and confidence. In the path I followed, being certain and being right, having clarity, felt good, felt right. Knowing exactly what I believed, and to some degree, certainty felt stabilizing, especially in a chaotic world. But over time, I began to notice the moments I grew most profoundly were usually the moments when certainty broke apart, when life challenged my assumptions, and experience complicated my worldview, when I encountered perspectives that disrupted the stories I had inherited. And honestly, that process can feel uncomfortable because inquiry destabilizes identity. It asks, what if I'm wrong? What if my perspectives are incomplete? But that discomfort became one of the greatest teachers in my life because self-inquiry taught me that wisdom is not the absence of uncertainty. Wisdom is the capacity to remain open inside complexity. Self-inquiry is the ongoing practice of questioning your own thinking, your own positionality, and your worldview, not from self-doubt, but from humility, because the mind naturally seeks certainty. It wants answers. It craves conclusions. It desires resolution, and it seeks stability. But certainty also creates closure, and closure often stops curiosity. That's why certainty can quietly evolve into bias and prejudice, siloed thinking, rigidity, and ideological possession. Because once we become convinced that we already know, we stop allowing reality to update us. Self-inquiry does the opposite. Inquiry keeps perspective and perception flexible. It allows consciousness to expand beyond inherited assumptions. And this is important. Self-inquiry is not weakness. It is disciplined openness. One of the greatest paradoxes of growth is realizing that the more you learn, the more you recognize how much you do not know. And that realization can either create fear or humility. Because humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is understanding that your perspective is always partial, that there are experiences you have not lived, contexts you have not considered, truths that you have not encountered. And this matters deeply in a world increasingly shaped by algorithms and ideological reinforcement, because modern systems reward certainty, hot takes, instant opinions, binary thinking, tribal alignment. But reality is often more complex than that. And consciousness expands when we develop the capacity to remain curious without collapsing into defensiveness. From a systems perspective, certainty reduces adaptability. Rigid systems struggle to evolve because adaptation requires feedback, and feedback requires openness. A system convinced it already understands reality stops learning from reality. That's true for individuals, organizations and cultures, political systems, and in our time, especially scientific paradigms. Inquiry creates adaptive intelligence. It allows systems to update themselves when conditions change. And internally, self-inquiry functions the same way. It interrupts automatic identity structures. It asks, why do I believe this? Where did this assumption come from? What experiences shaped this perspective? What might I not be seeing here? Those questions matter because the quality of our questions often determines the quality of our consciousness. Culturally, We are living through an era of amplified certainty. Everyone is expected to immediately have an opinion, take a side, declare allegiance, and speak with confidence. Algorithms and social platforms reward this, but certainty does not equal wisdom. Sometimes certainty is just fear, trying to protect identity. And one of the most dangerous things humans do is confuse familiarity with truth. Self-inquiry interrupts that pattern. It invites us to remain teachable, to recognize that the expanding consciousness requires the willingness to not fully know. And honestly, that level of humility has become increasingly rare. So today, pay attention to where certainty lives inside you. What beliefs have become untouchable? What assumptions have you stopped questioning? Where has defensiveness replaced curiosity? Ask yourself, what would change if I became more committed to inquiry than being right? Because self-inquiry is not about abandoning truth. It is about remaining open enough to continue discovering it. Find some time with your journals today and explore these questions. Ask yourself, what have I inherited without deeply questioning? Where do I become defensive instead of curious? What perspectives challenge my identity most deeply? And what would it look like to practice humility instead of certainty? Let's move into our breathwork practice. Find yourself a comfortable seat and put your feet on the floor. Sit up straight. Move your hips, roll your shoulders. Inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth with a sigh. All your breath. Do it again. All your breath. Inhale for about 5 seconds through your nose, about 5 seconds out your mouth. Continue that pattern, the comfortable pattern of inhaling through your nose, exhaling through your mouth. These extended breaths. Place your hand over your heart. Ask yourself, what would change if I became more committed to inquiry than being right? Ask yourself that several times as you breathe in and out. The answers don't have to come right now. Just ask the question. Next question. Inhale. What beliefs have I inherited without deeply questioning? Breathe through that question. Don't expect an answer. Just breathe through the question. Ask it several times. What beliefs have I inherited without deeply questioning? Breathe in. Challenge my identity most deeply. Breathe through that question. What perspectives challenge my identity most deeply? If these questions arise a somatic reaction, breathe through them. That's why we do breath. Breathe in. Look for answers. Just ask the question. What perspectives challenge my identity most deeply? Let's ask this question. Breathe in. What if there is more here than I currently understand? Seek the answers. Just ask the question. This question. What would it look like to practice humility instead of certainty? Breathe in. What would it look like to practice humility instead of certainty? Breathe through that question. Let's take a big inhale through our nose. Exhale all your breath through your mouth. Pull your belly in. Again, pull your belly in, all your air out. Return to the space. If this resonates, stay with the practice, because consciousness expands not through rigid certainty, but through the courage to remain teachable. Certainty closes the mind. Inquiry keeps consciousness alive. Take a breath. I'll see you tomorrow for Free Form Friday, where I answer impromptu questions about the subjects of the week. Have a good one.